I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Join me on a quest to find awe and wonder in all creation, human or wild, vast or small, spiritual encounters that move us beyond words. In 1992, Lynn Faust knew something about a small firefly population in Tennessee, a behavior she had observed that the world's leading experts thought preposterous. Fireflies do that only in Asia, they insisted. Yet this housewife from Knoxville had witnessed it with her own eyes at her family's mountain cabin. It took some elbow twisting before Lynn convinced two biologists to come see for themselves.
We stood there in the dark with these two professors who felt like they were with an idiot in the woods, this little Southern talking woman, and there was nothing flashing. And the feeling between the three of us was very uncomfortable. And then, thank goodness, a few began. And so they got all excited. And I've always thought God smiled on me that night because it was fairly early season.
Lynn's story is about how an untrained yet persistent person, driven by curiosity about fireflies, became an expert in the field. She's author of the guidebook Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs. Back in the early 90s, before becoming engrossed in firefly science, she revealed to the world that a hyper-localized species of firefly in the Great Smoky Mountains does a synchronized dance called a flash train, or just a train. It's the males, actually, that light up precisely at the same time. Some nights, just a few of them engage in this behavior, which is what worried Lynn as she crossed her fingers, waiting with those professors for something to happen. Other nights, thousands of males light up in procession. It's a spectacular, living, flowing, pulsing light show. Elkmont, Tennessee, is located in a lush, wooded holler along the banks of the Little River in the Smokies. This is where Lynn's adventure all started, near that family cabin, just 5 miles or so from the North Carolina border. The tiny community of Elkmont no longer exists, but was established nearly 200 years ago as a logging camp. Around the turn of the 20th century, well-off residents of Knoxville began buying land from the Little River Lumber Company for summer getaways. The Faust family cabin, which today exists only in photographs, was originally built in the 1920s or 30s, but not long afterward, the National Parks Service came knocking. The U.S. government wanted the land under this and under all the other Elkmont structures for the proposed Great Smoky Mountain National Park. The park would be formally established in 1940. Elkmont property owners were forced to sell their land, but were allowed to keep coming to their beloved cabins through a program of renewable 20-year leases. By 1972, however, the National Park Service had stopped renewing leases altogether. The Faust family was dismayed, to say the least. For years, Lynn hoped against hope that those special fireflies might somehow be the key to keeping ownership of that beloved family spot in the mountains.
That was Spring Cottage, is what we called the cabin. We spent as a family 4 generations up there every summer. And we'd go back and forth. I'm in Knoxville, which is just about an hour and a half drive away. So a lot of times the dads would stay in town and work, and the moms and kids would go up to the cabin. But my in-laws would be up there, and all the cousins. And it was a wonderful place. It's right in the middle of the park.
The cabin was a simple one-story clapboard structure that had been added onto over time. By the 1960s, when Lynn married into the family, it had a river rock chimney and a sitting room-sized porch, and with more than 20 people staying at the cabin at once, that porch became a special place for the grown-ups to hang out.
But it was that screened-in porch that every night in June, my mother-in-law, Emily Faust, she was more alert than the rest of us. Because we were hiking, we were swimming in the river every day, chasing babies, doing all that. So you really didn't stay up that late normally. But we would try to finish eating before it was dark. And in June, it can still be a little bit light at 9:30 or 10. But anyway, as soon as we ate, she would say, everyone, get the dishes done, put the babies to bed, the light show's about to begin. She had taken the time to really understand that we were seeing something very special.
Now, you may have seen fireflies flashing at night, particularly if you happen to live in the eastern half of the United States. This is that and more. At Elkmont, it's not random, scattered flashing. This species puts on an organized display, or show, as Emily Faust put it.
A flash train, each one has to have a different one from the other species flying in the same area, or else males would be landing with the wrong females, and females would be signaling and wasting their time with the wrong male. So each species has its own pattern. And what makes the synchronous species up at Elkmont so unique, it has one of the most complex flash train patterns that we know of. A flash train is a series of flashes. So 6 flashes followed by 3 seconds of dark. And it repeats for several hours every night. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Now, when do you think the female answers?
Well, I would imagine the female has to detect the flashing, and then I would imagine it takes some kind of saying, well, I'm here, and that would be in the dark spells, I'm guessing.
Yes, exactly. And we think that's the function of the dark spell. This is one of the mysteries of synchrony, which really we don't know why, but some species synchronize. It seems to be the ones in enormous numbers. And so you can imagine if you had thousands of males all randomly flashing out there, 6 flashes in a row, they almost blind themselves. And the females are hidden on the ground. They act very different. They don't do that complicated flash. They just do a quick little answer like that. They're hidden in the leaves, but they're usually perched a few inches off the ground, and they're looking. They're seeing, now, who's the brightest, who's the best, which one should I answer?
While these insects are hyper-focused, all business, for the humans, the event was a time of reverie and relaxation.
It makes you sleepy when you watch it. I mean, it's real peaceful. It makes everyone quiet. And finally, for the first time that day, you're quiet. You're seeing something that you have no control over, but it's so beautiful. And they don't really care that you're there unless you start messing with them. They're doing their own thing, and they are trying to ensure that there's going to be some next year. They're doing a mating thing. And it's just very peaceful. So usually we would just watch it like 10 or 15 minutes, and then everybody start yawning, and we just wander off to bed.
The Faust family cabin, for as long as it stood, was situated on what Lynn calls the lower road. There were 2 roads in Elkmont, upper and lower, cabins along each, and a total of some 80 cabins in the entire enclave. That the Faust family cabin was on the lower road seems to have been a crucial factor in this scientific revelation.
The upper road did not seem to have the light show that we did. And the upper road was the party road. That's where you went if you wanted a party going on or a card game or something like that. And so all the cabins are very close together. Their lights are on all the time. And you can have the most amazing display right out your window and never know it's happening if you have lights on. You actually have to go into the dark and stand in the dark and let your eyes get used to it and just get away from the light to see the sort of night mysteries. And so a lot of people would come down in their pajamas and to sit on our porch, and then they'd have to walk back up the hill to theirs.
And so it went for many years. June evenings meant a light show for these residents of Elkmont, just a taken-for-granted part of early summer, all the way up until 1992, when the last of the cabin leases expired.
In the years before 92, I was like everyone else in the world, enjoying the lightning bugs as a thing of beauty. And that's it. It didn't go any deeper than that. It was just like, wow, at Elkmont, they're really pretty. There's thousands and they go off and on together. We didn't think about it that much. We just knew it was the Nights of the Light show. And then by the 4th of July, it's over. And then you get on with your summer and you don't think about it. But in 92 is when we had to walk away from our entire community of Elkmont. And we loved these cabins and so did everyone else. And it now 5 generations of people had spent their summers at Elkmont. It was such a special place. And so anytime you're losing something you love or someone you love, if you have that luxury, so to speak, to know you're losing it. In this case, we had the slow death of Elkmont going for 20 years, from 1972 to 92. We knew that we were going to have to walk away from the cabins then. And so as you're losing a thing you love, you start paying a lot more attention.
Lynn Faust really had to sit up and pay attention. One day at home in Knoxville, when she picked up a copy of Science News and was shocked by what she read.
The timing of that Science News article, which was in 91, was serendipitous because the cover of it had a firefly tree in Asia. I think it was in Malaysia. And I've been lucky enough to see those fireflies too. But I picked up the cover, I thought, and this is like when we all got magazines in the mail and everything. I picked it up. I thought, I bet they're going to tell me about the Elkmont fireflies, the Elkmont lightning bugs. And so I read the article, and that's when I read the line that there are no synchronous fireflies in the Western Hemisphere. It's like, well, wait a minute. I think that's what we've been watching all these years. So in those days, we had what was called a Tuesday night dinner. They were wonderful. And it was the entire Faust family, my husband's family, with Emily, my mother-in-law, and we would eat dinner together at her house every Tuesday night. And so after I read the article, I took the article in to Tuesday night dinner. I thought, when you look at something just as beauty, you're not sitting there with a stopwatch and timing things and taking the temperature and all that. But I took the article in. I said, how would you all describe what we watch on the porch at Elkmont? I thought, maybe it's just me. But everyone gave the same answer. And then it got hard. It's like, okay, when do we actually see them? And everybody got kind of quiet. And somebody said, well, we don't see them after the 4th of July. It's like, okay. And what time? Somebody said, well, it has to be dark. That's when Emily makes us sit down. And I thought, that's right. It's always dark, because there are some species that flash at dusk, but these don't. And so I contacted several of the people in that article, and I'm still in contact with them today. I have to say there was a little bit of hope that if we had something so rare and endangered right around our cabin, that maybe they wouldn't tear down the cabins and totally mess up the habitat. That was the year, 92, when we had to walk away from the cabin, and that was horrible. But I went from just enjoying it in a rocking chair to actually trying to understand what was this.
The old family cabin in Elkmont was to receive no reprieve, no clemency. It would be razed to the ground. But Lynn's affection for this magical place in the Smokies had primed her to receive more than just a little bit of whiplash while reading that Science News cover story about fireflies. As the expression goes, she was the right person in the right place at the right time, the perfect voice to make noise about this exceptionally rare phenomenon. As it turns out, Elkmont is a Goldilocks zone for synchronous fireflies. More about that aspect in just a moment. And in the middle of this story of care and concern for a rare species of flying bugs, all aflame and a-flashing, we also have the story of a woman with a eureka moment that compelled her to become a noted specialist in this field. Our guest, Lynn Faust, is author of the guidebook, Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs. I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. I'd like to introduce you to another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, The Lisa Show, hosted by comedian, believer, and single mother Lisa Valentine Clark. The Lisa Show delves into most any challenge that meets us in the course of our lives, especially challenges in the realm of human relationships, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, or social issues. Lisa and her council of moms are willing to tackle it. Figuring life out is vexing enough without losing an ability to laugh or cry together or just plain talk things through. The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to constant wonder. The environment of vegetative growth, weather, water, and elevation around the Faust family cabin was exactly the right habitat to support this population of special fireflies. And by the way, we're talking about the species Photinus carolinus. Elkmont was in maturing woodland, hadn't been logged since the 1920s. And this species of firefly doesn't do well in new growth forests. Here's Lynn addressing these matters of habitat.
Knoxville is about 1,000 feet, and the Smokies go up to 6,000 feet. We're not high like you guys are out in Utah, but there's a wonderful band of elevation from about 3,500 feet down to 2,200 feet that all sorts of stuff loves. And the Carolinus fireflies like that band. So Elkmont is about 2,200 to 2,400 feet. They also require, we think, forest that is at least 60 years old. And the forest around Elkmont is now approaching 100 years old, or maybe a little over now. The Smokies have been completely logged twice in history, but you'd never know it because we're here in the east, we have rain, and stuff grows fast. So a lot of visitors think they're looking at virgin forest, and they're not. Anyway, so a maturing forest, and that is necessary because these males that are flying have to see each other in order to synchronize. So they're not going to be flying around where it's brushy and, there's stuff to fly into. They need an open forest floor. In this part of the country, once you get a 100-year-old forest, it starts being fairly open underneath. And I also have noticed you usually always hear water. It doesn't have to be right along the water, but you hear water. And we just have so much water. We're so blessed with it in the Smokies, but there's usually the sound of water somewhere when you're seeing the synchronous display. You can walk up a trail and go a little higher on the hill, and they're gone. There's nothing there. That must probably have something to do with their larval life. They're down there low in the moist dirt, eating, growing, but they seem limited to moisture areas. They're a forest creature. They're not particularly out in the open.
Tell us in particular what this bug is that makes it not a fly at all, because it's a beetle, is it not? And what can you tell a newcomer to lightning bugs about what these creatures are?
I never heard the word firefly till I was 38 years old. In Tennessee, they're a lightning bug. But sadly, with all the media now and internet and phones, even kids are calling them fireflies. You will hear me say it more on this interview because it's one less syllable. It's easier to say than lightning bug. But it makes me sad because it was a regional term that was quite strong and near and dear to my heart. A lightning bug or a firefly is not a bug and it's not a fly, like you said. It is a beetle, and a beetle means it has a hard covering on top of its wings. But the cool thing about fireflies is everybody likes them. Most bugs, people scream and stomp on them and run away from them, or they think they're going to get bit or stung. Fireflies are completely harmless. And to almost anyone that was lucky enough to be a child growing up where they had fireflies, they have warm memories, happy memories. And so I always feel like I'm cheating when I work with lightning bugs because everybody smiles, as soon as I say it, instead of wanting to argue about it. And they're not political, and they're sort of wonderful little creatures. But they are a small beetle. And like all beetles, the male and female have to find each other and mate. They have a very short adult life, usually about 2 to 4 weeks. A real lucky one lives 4 weeks. So they meet, they mate, and within a few days, the female lays eggs. About 3 weeks later, the little tiny larvae hatch out, and they're so tiny. They molt their skin because they're an insect. They can't keep growing. They have to get rid of their hard shell-like skin, and each time they grow. But they'll molt up to 5 times. Usually that gets them all the way to frost. And then they go underground in the winter. We never find them. We don't know where they are. They're gone. They're hiding, they're warm, and they're in the moist soil. But as larvae, that's when they are hugely carnivorous. They are eating everything they can find under the soil. We just don't see it, particularly for this genus and species. They are subterranean, almost like an earthworm. But that's when the main part of their life happens. So they're eating like crazy. Once they're an adult, they don't need to eat. All they do is find a mate and mate. But anyway, the larvae make it through the winter. When it starts warming up, they'll come out and usually eat one more meal, which might be little tiny things in the soil, little bugs, little worms, little eggs of other things, and then they will pupate. So all beetles do egg, larvae, pupa, and adult. So they're a good beetle. They're a good solid beetle. And once they pupate, they're very, very vulnerable because they can't move and they actually glow. Not real bright. They're usually just under the soil. And they'll pupate for about 3 weeks. That all depends on temperature. The warmer it is, the quicker they mature. And then they are synchronized not only in the way the males flash, but they're synchronized in emergence. I see that across almost all the temperate species. They all come out within a few days of each other. And that makes sense. They all have a very short life. The male has to find the female. They got to get together, and then they're dead. To me, it's amazing every year that each species, we have about 26 species here in Tennessee at least, all of them pretty well have synchronized their emergence. And how they do it, I don't know.
With their rare, sensational beauty, these insects could easily get loved to death by humans. So these days, during the month of June, the National Park Service strictly controls access to the Elkmont area by lottery. Winning a ticket is the hard part, but once you've gotten lucky and are allowed in, and once your eyes are acclimated to the dark, the fireflies are fairly easy to spot, as Lynn explains.
These are fairly eye level for a human, and yes, you see them like crazy because they want to be seen. They are like teenage boys in a race car. You know, they're cruising around. They're trying to be as flashy as possible. The females, on the other hand, do not want to be seen. They're fairly cryptic, and they just have one little light on their tail, where their males have 2 big lights. But she has one, and she will twist her abdomen and flash it only at the male that has caught her eye. So she doesn't want everybody else to see her. She just wants that one male to see her. We're not sure, but it appears that the male to female ratio is often 50 to 1, 100 to 1. So the male competition is intense, and they're desperate because they have, 14 nights max to find a female. So one reason she aims that is she'll get mobbed if she just broadcasts and does her little flash out for everybody to see. I've seen, my record was over 50 males on one female, just fighting, crawling, pushing each other because they all want her. And we call them mating clusters. The female has a little bit more choice than you would think, even when 50 of the males have mobbed her. She will eventually choose one. It's not always the biggest. Sometimes it's the smallest and the fastest because he got to her first. The male will transfer a nuptial gift or spermatophore to the female. And we think the female has some means to assess the size and the quality of that nuptial gift before she totally commits to mating with him. And so when we used to be studying the mating clusters, it looked like about a third of the time after, maybe a minute or 2, the female would suddenly reject the male, and she would push him away and do her wings out, and he was rejected. So when she rejects the unworthy male, waiting males mob her again. And so somebody else has a chance. And I'm making this seem almost human, but when you've watched it for 30 years, it's very similar.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're all that different.
If you watch a little piece of nature over a span of 30 years, you can learn the most intimate of details. Lynn Faust has obviously come a long way from having been just a rocking chair variety of firefly watcher. I want to take you back now, though, to those early days when she first thought her discovery just might help rescue the family cabin, which was just one of dozens that the Park Service had marked for demolition. What if demolition would somehow endanger this species, she wondered. Somewhat naively, she went straight to park headquarters about 6 miles from the cabin site to say her piece.
They knew I was from Elkmont. It was a very politically charged, horrible fight that went on. It's the longest running fight in the National Park Service in the country because it had been a problem since day one. The cabins predate the park. But anyway, I went down there to ask, and they just looked at me like I had two heads. I said, you know, we have some really beautiful lightning bugs up at Elkmont. Are you all aware of that? And I mean, it was like, don't talk to her. And so they weren't curious. They didn't want to come see it. They didn't care. They just wanted me to leave. So I left. So then I went to UT. I went to the biology department. You know, I thought, well, who does bugs? They'll know about it. And it was just, you know, blank looks. Nobody knew. We had a naturalist who had spent his summers in Elkmont, and he had written a number of books, and I'd never actually read his books. I meant to, but, you know, never had. Well, I got hold of his books. I thought, well, he'll write about it. He's a naturalist. The books are great, by the way, Ross Hutchins. But by the time he had a cabin up there, he was an elderly man. And you really don't walk around in the dark at night once you're past a certain age. And he lived on the party road where there were lights. So he would have had to walk down to our cabin to see him. And so he never even mentioned them. So suddenly it's like nobody knows about these.
How did that make you feel? I mean, there you are. Were you just were you incredulous that you were like the person who knew?
Yes. I was in my 30s then. I believed that once you became an adult, meaning somebody 20 years older than I was at the time, that they knew everything and that all scientists knew everything and that all I needed to do was find that book about fireflies and then I could read about it. None of that existed, see? And now I know that no one knows anything and that adults are just bigger versions of kids and we're all wandering around trying our best, but we're not that smart. But back then I still believed. And so I thought, well, I'll write these scientists in this article. I'll get hold of them and they'll know. Well, they didn't know either and they didn't believe me because I was some silly little housewife from Tennessee. But two of the scientists, John Copeland and Andy Moisef, agreed to come the next summer. I said, just come. I mean, this is really pretty neat. And John was actually in Malaysia studying synchronous fireflies when I wrote him. But in those days, no email. These are letters that you had to write. You had to find somebody's address and a stamp and all that. And my letter came to him while he was in Malaysia for 6 weeks. But we started communicating. John was a musician also and had me draw it in a musical score. He said, draw like 4 individuals, how they flash, because the flash train, like I tried to explain to you, it's kind of hard to explain. Once you see it, it's like, oh, okay, that's what it is, but it's hard to explain. And I said, they flash at the same time, they're dark at the same time, then they flash again at the same time. And so I wrote it as a musical score. And I'm not a musician, but thank you, Miss Stansberry, my music teacher in grammar school. She taught us how to do that. And I mailed it to him. And when he saw it, they were both interested. They're both like neurophysical biologists or something. They were more interested in the actual synchrony than they were in the bug itself. I'm more interested in the bug itself. But they didn't know what I was seeing either. So anyway, they wanted me to collect larvae that fall. You'll often see the larvae, they're fairly active until frost, and then they disappear. I knew we had a lot of them up there. They were always around this creek that runs through our yard. And so at the time, I took our church youth group. I needed a bunch of kids with good eyes, you know, that can run around in the dark and not be frightened. So I took about 10 kids up there. We spent the night. We had a great weekend, but their job was to catch larvae. And they did. And we caught like 125 larvae from right there and sent them to Georgia Southern, where John Copeland was at the time. And he was going to rear them in his lab. They made it to his lab, but during Christmas that year, they had a power outage and they all died.
Even at that, Professor Copeland thought he knew what he was looking at when he first saw the larvae in his lab. He was not at all convinced that this was a new or unknown species.
I said, well, whatever, come up next June, you'll see the adults. So they arrived, and suddenly I had this moment of panic. They arrived in the daylight, and I knew where I wanted them to stand. And that's when often you don't know what you don't know until you have to tell it to someone else. And then you realize how little you know. And suddenly I thought, what time do they come out? Is it 9:30? Is it 8:30? Is it 10? And what if they're not out yet? I thought, I know they're out in June generally, but it's a bell-shaped curve. One night there'll be nothing. The next night you might see 5, the next night 50, the next night 100. And it's a very steep bell-shaped curve. But anyway, we stood there in the dark with these 2 professors who felt like they were with an idiot in the woods, this little Southern talking woman, and there was nothing flashing. But it was not late enough. Now I can tell you at 9:35, they start. And so we stood there, and the feeling between the 3 of us was very uncomfortable, because I think they were both thinking, one had driven from Connecticut, the other one from South Georgia. It's like, we took all this time and effort to come stand next to this idiotic woman in the woods, and there's nothing flashing. And then, thank goodness, a few began. And so they got all excited, just seeing 1 or 2. It's like, oh, hang on, just wait. And then they all came out. And I've always thought God smiled on me that night, because it was fairly early season. But that night was a beautiful display. And they came for the next maybe 16 or 18 years. They came every summer. So I worked with them, and my children, we have 3 sons, they were getting older, so I could leave a little more. And over those years, I became much more nerdy. I became a firefly nerd, and I started calling them fireflies. And it was those 2 men that used the term firefly that night. And I looked at them, it's like, do you mean lightning bugs? They said, well, fireflies. And I said, well, we call them lightning bugs down here. And they said, well, we call them fireflies. They converted me just because you say the word so much in the course of an evening. But from there, then I was able to find there's really nothing written about them for the common person. There were scientific papers, focusing on some tiny detail. And that's a language that in those days, I didn't know it. You look at a scientific paper and just go, I don't want to read this thing. And now I love them. I think they're great. But 30 years ago, so I ended up going to the children's library in downtown Knoxville, which I thought the library will have firefly books, lightning bug books. But it was that trip to the library in the little chair in the children's section, the little red chair. I was sitting there in the little table on the floor, and there were a couple of children's books. Fireflies in the Night, which is still a classic, but it's just a children's story of the very lonely firefly by Eric Carle. And that was my education. At the time, there wasn't anything else. Nothing other than academic articles, which I did not have academic access. In those days, you really couldn't get them.
So what I hear you saying is that you took it to heart to try to educate the common reader.
Well, I was the common reader at the time, and so I was just trying to learn, because I kept asking John and Andy questions about the life. That's what I was interested in. Like, do they mate more than once? How many babies do they have? Where are the larvae? Andy gave me a great gift. And this is pretty far into it, because we now had computers and we were even doing email. So at the beginning, none of that existed. But at the end of one of the seasons together, he handed me a disc. He said, Lynn, you need these. And at that time, the literature on fireflies was kind of doable. You had these great naturalists that wrote very understandable papers back in the 1800s, all the way up to the 60s. You really weren't overwhelmed with papers. He had put them all on a disc for me, because he knew I didn't have academic access, and I was asking more and more questions.
As I've already mentioned, the family cabin no longer stands. It came down in 2017. But Lynn Faust herself is indomitable. She has channeled her considerable energy into learning about fireflies, working right alongside certified experts, many of whom doubted her claims some 30 years ago. In spite of all her curiosity and enthusiasm, though, she never really set out to write the book on lightning bugs, so to speak, a field guide. No, it was a devastating accident that slowed her down enough for that kind of undertaking and led her to put everything she knew about these creatures down in one place. I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. I'd like to take just a brief moment here to introduce you to another gem from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's called In Good Faith. You can immerse yourself in a soul-nourishing experience of spiritual exploration. Stephen Cat Perry is the host, and he features people of diverse religions and spiritualities. He always interviews them with an aim to come upon a genuine understanding of the guest's relationship with the divine. Maybe you're wanting to strengthen your own relationship, or maybe you just feel a hunger for thoughtful conversation that touches on faith and belief. Whatever your need, it's truly rare these days in the media landscape to find conversations that unfailingly nourish and uplift your soul. In Good Faith does that every time, and you'll find it wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder. So, Lynn, this is what happened to me. I married somebody whose parents lived in Knoxville, and that took me from the American Western deserts on vacations back to see my in-laws in the Great Smokies. And I loved seeing, just right there in suburban Knoxville, seeing the species that are, I don't know what they are, but they're orange, and they kind of float upward, and they don't flash so much as they just have a solid glow. And then we went on vacation clear up to Ohio, and then I was seeing for the first time lightning bugs way up in the trees in a completely different color. And I still remember just the joy of discovering that new phenomenon, that new animal, and its difference, and its different color. I want to know more about the kind of thrill. We talked about this before, but I'm just wondering if you can give me a word or two more about what I experienced in the novelty of something that for me was very rare, but I don't think it has to be rare.
Well, what you experienced is almost universal if you have the right mindset and spirit to appreciate it. And most people do. Some of them are so busy they won't slow down enough. But what you saw and you noticed even on that first trip, there are different ones. There's ones in trees, there's ones down low, some flash, some glow. I never get tired of that. What you saw, it's good for us. It's good for your soul. What you saw that night, and it made you want more, and then it makes you want to understand it more.
Lynn began her quest wanting to know more about fireflies, primarily just for herself, to satisfy her own personal curiosity. But in her voice, I hear what we call a people person, gregarious and sharing. I think she was bound to share her joy and amazement with others.
The field guide that I wrote, it was for regular people so that no one else would have to go sit in the public library in the tiny chairs and read a children's book trying to learn what they had in their yard. It was much harder to do. When I said you really realize what you don't know when you have to explain it to someone else, I have always kept field notes. That's just part of my DNA. Yeah. And so in 2011, I had a devastating accident and ended up in bed for a month. And as I laid in that bed, I thought, okay, I've always kind of wanted to put this down for other people so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel on fireflies, because everybody likes them. That's what's interesting, that there wasn't a guide. And so I got my field notes out and I began the book in bed in 2011. And at the time, though, I didn't want to give up a year of my life writing a book. It's like, no, I got too much to do. I don't want to write this book. And I thought, well, I'm never going to have this opportunity again. And what I didn't know, it was 6 years of my life, not one.
Along with her ongoing study and observation, the kind of work that produced that guidebook, Lynn Faust also lends her expertise to predict the summertime emergence of this synchronous firefly population, and that doesn't necessarily always put her right there on site.
I really don't go to Elkmont during the main time much anymore. I work with the park. I help them predict it. I have a mathematical model where we can predict the peak nights fairly accurately.
Remember now, this is the same person whom the park officials had little patience for initially when she approached them in 1992. In subsequent years, Lynn has discovered that a formula used by farmers to determine just when to plant corn could also be applied to forecast the emergence of fireflies at mating time. That emergence begins with just one male, then the numbers ascend in a bell curve to an apex or the peak night.
My biggest kick is finding the first male. And so I'll drive all the way up there and there are no people there. See, it gets so filled with people later. But I'll go up the night I think we'll have the first male. And I can get as excited about that. He only comes out for a few minutes. And most times I've already turned around to walk back to the car thinking, darn it, I came too early, but my math told me they might be out, and then there'll suddenly be one. And it's that flash train, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I just get excited. It's like they're back, that they're back.
What if they didn't come back? What if the habitat had been so compromised? There's a spirit in you about preservation.
Yeah, I realize even at Elkmont, which is luckily a national park, and our parks are going to be saviors for all sorts of little creatures, and they already are. It can be a city park. It can be a cemetery. But the national parks, the national forests, the wildlife management areas, and things like the Nature Conservancy and conservation places, we just need places to not be mown down with bulldozers. And that's where the healthiest populations are now, and no light. And I feel like lightning bugs are little ambassadors to people. We're all inside at night. Everybody's looking at their phone, TV, or whatever, and everybody's tired at night. You don't want to go do something else at night. But it pulls people back outside. And once they're outside, then they start realizing it is all connected.
So what you've just said, Lynn, that makes me think that anybody who listens to Constant Wonder over time is going to recognize in your words, one of our central themes behind the podcast. We've got to reconnect with this world of incredible phenomena. That reconnection is vitally important to our sense of awe and wonder. And even though it can be disheartening to bring it up, we are in fact alienated as modern human beings from nature. And it's the very world that sustains us.
Oh, it's heartbreaking. The valley I live in, we've lived here 50 years, and it had dirt roads and farmers with mules. When we moved out, it was rural. It was so gorgeous. And it is now subdivision land. And they're finishing a house every 36 hours and thousands of houses. And all the fields are gone. They're now houses. And all the deer have come to live at our place, so I can't keep a garden anymore. They're eating everything. And I feel sorry for them, though. It's like they don't have anywhere to go anymore. And so you're absolutely right. The fireflies have gone out in Hardin Valley.
What happens to people deep inside when they encounter just these amazing, almost impossible things that the universe offers us?
We're so removed from nature, people forget they are part of it. I mean, I've always thought of lightning bugs simply as one of God's gifts to humans. They're just so beautiful and they make us happy. And, they're not an agricultural pest. The academics rarely get funded because a firefly doesn't hurt anybody, so you're never going to get funded. They need to be dangerous to us. But these do something to your soul and your spirit, and they make you slow down and get a little quieter, and they bring the childlike wonder back to the oldest out there. And that's good. We need to all keep that childhood wonder. But you've got to slow down and go out there. And I tell particularly teenagers, it's like quit looking at your phone in the dark because it messes your night vision up. Then you're not going to see as well. And the older you get, the more of an issue that becomes. And luckily, the Smokies doesn't have cell service. So that's sort of a nice thing. Everybody goes to Elkmont. They still are all holding their phones. Even though there's no signal, they're just, doing this. But, and it's not good for us. I think what's good for you is sitting with loved ones in the dark, just marveling at it's the love song. It's a species trying really hard to show up next year again.
We asked Lynn, who has traveled the world over studying fireflies, if she has any favorite species or favorite places to watch them.
I don't have a favorite place. It's kind of like asking me my favorite child or something, but different places stand out just because of their beauty. We have one species called the blue ghost. The blue ghosts are marvelous. They're actually quite widespread across the Southeast. And when someone sees a blue ghost, they know that name from that day on. And they recognize them because they float and glow. And they're real low to the ground. And their glow is actually greenish, but it looks bluish the older you are. So people call them blue ghosts. And they're so magical. And I guess in the 30-something years I've done this, I've seen 2 super peaks of blue ghosts where you look out and the whole forest floor looks like the Milky Way or a blue moving cloud because there's so many of them. I mean, it's fun to just see one, but when you see a super peak and it's only one night of the year and you have to just accidentally be at the right place at the right time, but that is super memorable. But each display is unique in its own way. And it doesn't have to be synchronous. There are beautiful displays, where they're just out there flashing. It's usually the higher numbers are the most breathtaking because you just can't believe there are that many, and then you don't see them in the day. That's always kind of interesting. It's like, wait a minute, there were thousands out here last night. Where are they?
Where they are hiding is in tall grasses and shrubs, dodging the heat of the day. Now, Lynn Faust is so good at prognosticating when fireflies will emerge that it's not only the national park personnel in the Smokies who want her advice. Here's a story to show you what I mean. She once really put her reputation on the line for a young man in the Ohio area who needed her help.
I get thousands of emails a year, and some are pretty strange. I've had some really weird requests, but most people are very earnest in something they want. So this young man had contacted me that he was going to propose to his girlfriend and wanted to know where in the Smokies to bring her and when would the peak night be. See, everybody wants to know when is the peak night, the night of the most. And it is definitely the best, the peak night. And I really struggle with that because he wasn't from this area. So it's very hard to explain backcountry campsites, or I couldn't get him secretly into Elkmont. I get so many people asking me to do that, and I just can't. I can go in on a permit, but everybody else, they have a lottery, and it's like 1 out of every 300 people is chosen, and it's very complicated. And so finally, I realized I've done work in southern Ohio, which has great fireflies, and they have the same synchronous firefly up there as we have in the Smokies, but not the density, not the millions of them, but it's good enough in a small area and there's no people. And it was going to be closer to this young man. So I recommended to him if he wanted, and I gave him the names of my friends that run a nature conservancy up there, to get with them. So I actually never met him, but that's what he chose to do. It was a lot less driving, and he didn't want 1,000 people. You don't want 1,000 people around when you're going to propose. And then I worry about everything. It's like, oh my gosh, what if she says no? This could be terrible. And, he's gone to all this effort. And then one of the ecologists up there, he's a funny guy. And he said, you know what? I can play the guitar. I could hide behind a tree and play the guitar while he proposes. And we all got a kick out of that. And he didn't end up doing that.
So, of course, I had to ask Lynn if those synchronous fireflies in Ohio came out on cue, because it would have been a double whammy to be disappointed not only by the girl, but then also rejected by the fireflies.
The young man, he didn't have as far to drive, so he could kind of come when they got good. But yeah, they were flashing around, and she said yes. A year or two later, they sent me a picture where was it Halloween, I guess? They were insect people. And so they were dressed as praying mantises. And if you know about praying mantises, the female will bite the male's head off. And so it's an unusual insect to choose to show up as a couple in your costume. But they had a baby praying mantis. They had a little baby by then. So I think, they lived happily ever after.
Happily ever after is what any of us could ever want. And we want it for this rare population of synchronously flashing beetles. And of course, for that costumed couple too, wherever they might be with their praying mantis baby. But happily ever after doesn't always look the way you might think. Lynn has a surprising family story that illustrates this point. Do you remember Emily Faust, Lynn's mother-in-law, who first introduced Lynn to the light show? In the course of my conversation with Lynn, I was delighted to hear about Emily's exceptional powers of observation, her keen attention to the world around her.
She was such a cool lady. We've lost her now, but she was always a peaceful person and noticed things. I'll tell you a story, and this has nothing to do with insects, but she had cataract surgery maybe 25 years ago, and they went ahead and did both eyes, and she went blind. I mean, that wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to go in and we'd bring her home and, wear the sunglasses for a few days. She went blind. And they said, oh, well, that's a rare side effect. And the doctor said, well, we think it will come back. Like, that's going to make you feel real good when you're sitting there and you can't see. And, it's like, well, when? And they go, oh, well, we don't know, but hopefully it will come back. And she was in her 80s at this point. And so we were all just frantic. She has 3 children and then everybody's married and kids. So there's a big family. And we were all more upset, it seemed like, than she was. And so what we did, we started checking on her every day because there she was kind of tapping around her house. So I went in, maybe a week later. We had learned just to come in because we didn't want her to get up and have to find the door and all that. So I knew the room she liked to sit in was a library with books and cozy chairs and stuff and nice big windows. And so I went in the front of the house where I could kind of tap on the window so she wouldn't be scared when I walked in. So I tapped, said, hey, Emily, I'm here. But she was just sitting on the couch, just quietly sitting on the couch. Couldn't read. She was a big reader. She couldn't do anything. She had a cup of tea. And so she motioned for me to come in when she heard my voice. And I walked in. I said, so how's it going? I'd be this drama queen. Poor little me. I want to be able to see, bad doctors hurting my eyes. And she said, I am having the most lovely morning. And she said, I'm sitting here and realize that I don't listen to things enough. She said, now that I can't see, I've been listening to all the birds this morning and I'm having the nicest time. She said, I have my cup of tea and she was happy. And I thought, oh man, I thought of that so many times. She wasn't complaining. She was just waiting for her vision to come back. And it did. It came back in about a month and sort of gradually. And so she totally recovered. But instead of moaning and griping, she learned to enjoy the bird songs better because she said she had always been so busy she wasn't listening enough. She was mainly seeing.
Lynn Faust is author of the guidebook Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs. She's the one who brought to world attention the now famous fireflies in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This episode was produced by Tenery Taylor with help from Mamie Teeples, sound designed by James Call. We're so grateful to all of the guests who have joined with us this season, Season 7 of the Constant Wonder podcast. These are people who have taught us to see and listen more carefully to the wonders of the world around us. We'll be taking a break for the next few weeks, but during that time, we're going to be sharing with you an episode from another podcast we think you'll enjoy. Watch your feed for that and also for a trailer to Season 8, which we've already been very busy working on. I'm Marcus Smith. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.